The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with heated debate, but one consensus remained unshaken. Earth was irrelevant. Among the grand civilizations of the cosmos, humanity was a mere footnote, a primitive species still bound to a single planet, using combustion engines and kinetic weaponry in an age of antimatter and planetary shields. Their wars were brutish, their technology laughably outdated. A species still spilling blood over land and ideology had no place in interstellar affairs. The Zenari Dominion's envoy, High Warlord Xor, leaned forward, his reptilian features twisting into a smirk. "You overestimate them," he sneered, addressing the few council members who dared to entertain the notion of human involvement. "They are little more than animals with delusions of grandeur. If the war ever reached their system, they would crumble in days." Few objected. The Zenari had reason to be confident. Their empire stretched across hundreds of systems, their fleets unmatched, their soldiers genetically engineered for war. The Galactic Council, weakened and desperate, was in no position to challenge them. If the humans were to be crushed in the crossfire, so be it. Far from this discussion, Earth remained unaware of the storm hurtling toward it. Life continued as usual, petty disputes, political squabbles, advancements in medicine and AI that the galactic stage would consider trivial. Humanity looked to the stars, unaware that something among them had taken notice. The first sign came as a blip on deep space observatories, anomalous readings near Mars' orbit. Governments dismissed it as debris until the images came in. Gigantic structures, angular and alien, floating lifeless in the void. The wreckage of a battle. The twisted remains of a council ship desperately fleeing a Zenari assault, now drifting in humanity's backyard. Panic rippled through intelligence agencies and militaries. The world's leading scientists scrambled to understand what they were seeing, but the answer came too soon. An automated distress signal pulse from the wreckage, something not meant for human ears. Someone was out there. Days later, the sky burned. A Zenari war fleet, sleek and menacing, emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the solar system. Their mission was clear: eliminate the last of the Council survivors and wipe out any potential witnesses. Earth was not a concern. It was an inconvenience. The United Nations gathered in emergency session as reports poured in. Massive objects approaching at impossible speeds, their sheer scale dwarfing any human creation. Military forces scrambled. Satellites turned to watch, and for the first time in modern history, every nation stood on the same side of the battlefield. The first Zenari strike came without warning. Orbital bombardments lanced across the sky, targeting Earth's most developed cities. Billions watched in horror as fire rained down upon their world. Entire districts reduced to molten craters in seconds. Power grids failed, communications collapsed, and in the span of hours, civilization found itself at war with an enemy it had never known existed. The first human response was disorganized, desperate. Fighter jets scrambled against warships that blotted out the sky, missiles streaking toward targets that phased out of existence before impact. Zenari ground forces landed soon after, towering, armored behemoths wielding weapons that defied human understanding. Infantry platoons were torn apart before they even had a chance to engage. Yet something unexpected happened. The Zenari, conditioned by centuries of conquest, expected surrender. They had seen species bow before them, civilizations offering tribute in exchange for mercy. But humans did not kneel. They fought. From the burning ruins of their cities, they launched ambushes, fighting in ways that made no tactical sense to the Zenari. They buried explosives beneath rubble, turned fallen skyscrapers into death traps, used every ounce of their so-called primitive ingenuity to strike back. The invaders were met with snipers who needed no targeting software, with soldiers who fought past wounds that should have killed them, with civilians who picked up rifles and refused to flee. It was not strategy. It was sheer, unrelenting defiance. Still, the Zenari pressed forward. Their numbers were too great, their technology too advanced. The Council had fallen before them, and Earth would be no different. Their warlords watched from orbit, confident that the rebellion would be stamped out within days. They underestimated the storm they had unleashed. The Zenari expected a swift and effortless extermination. Their calculations projected total planetary control in less than a week. Their war doctrine had been refined over centuries: overwhelm, intimidate, and force submission. It had worked every time. Earth was proving different. The first ground battles exposed a flaw in the Zenari strategy. They had always fought civilizations accustomed to large-scale, structured warfare, armies that followed predictable formations, governments that surrendered when their capitals fell. Humanity did neither. There was no single point of failure, no central command to decapitate. Every city, every street, every ruin became a battlefield. Zenari patrols were ambushed in narrow alleyways, their towering war machines toppled by makeshift explosives planted in sewer lines. Tanks designed for open-field combat found themselves useless in dense urban jungles, where buildings collapsed on top of them, trapping entire units in fiery graves. Their aerial superiority faltered as human pilots, vastly outgunned, turned suicide runs into weapons, smashing jets and drones into critical weak points. For the first time in Zenari history, casualty reports began to rise at an alarming rate. Their commanders, confused by the sheer unpredictability of human resistance, adjusted their tactics. They deployed shock troopers, elite, genetically enhanced warriors meant to crush rebellions before they began. These soldiers, faster, stronger, and nearly impervious to conventional weapons, were unleashed upon major strongholds. They expected the humans to break. They didn't. Instead, they adapted. Military engineers reverse-engineered, captured Zenari weapons within days, repurposing them to fire armor-piercing rounds. Snipers modified their rifles to punch through even the thickest exoskeletons. Civilians, once fleeing, now fought alongside soldiers, passing along vital intel through crude but effective encrypted networks. Humanity wasn't just resisting, it was learning. And then came the first real horror for the Zenari: humanity's willingness to sacrifice. The Battle of Washington, D.C. should have been a decisive victory for the invaders. Zenari forces surrounded the remnants of Earth's leadership, their artillery reducing entire blocks to rubble. The city was a death trap, and any rational force would have surrendered. Instead, the defenders rigged entire districts to detonate. As the Zenari breached key strongholds, underground fuel reserves were ignited, sending shockwaves that tore through entire platoons. Thousands of humans perished alongside their enemy, but in that moment, the Zenari saw something that made them hesitate. This was not a species that feared death. As the war dragged on, the Zenari's frustration turned to desperation. Their forces should have been advancing, yet they found themselves locked in drawn-out conflicts, unable to maintain control. Earth's resistance didn't crumble under overwhelming firepower. It hardened. Every fallen soldier became a martyr. Every lost city a lesson in how to fight smarter, hit harder. The Zenari warlords, once smug in their superiority, now faced a grim reality. They were still winning, but the cost was rising. And for the first time, they began to ask themselves a question they had never considered in any previous conquest. What if they had made a mistake? The Zenari war machine was designed for domination, not endurance. Their campaigns were swift, their victories decisive. But Earth was not collapsing. It was evolving. The first major shift came when humanity stopped reacting and started planning. The remnants of the world's militaries consolidated, pooling resources and expertise. Scientists, once bound by bureaucracy, now work without restriction. Every captured Zenari weapon was dismantled, studied, and repurposed. Every battle provided new data. Humanity was no longer just resisting. It was adapting faster than the Zenari could counter. The first sign of change came in orbit. A Zenari dreadnought, patrolling above Earth's atmosphere, was targeted by something unexpected: a ballistic missile. By galactic standards, it was outdated, a relic of primitive warfare. But when it struck, the explosion ripped through the dreadnought's shielding, tearing it apart in seconds. The Zenari had spent centuries perfecting energy-based defenses, never considering that crude, high-velocity projectiles could bypass them entirely. That single loss set off a chain reaction. Humanity's missile silos, once relics of Cold War paranoia, were repurposed into devastating anti-orbital weapons. Fighter jets, incapable of breaking atmosphere on their own, were strapped with retrofitted Zenari thrusters, allowing human pilots to engage in space combat. The invaders, who once saw Earth as an afterthought, were now forced to dedicate entire fleets just to hold their position. The ground war escalated in kind. Cyber warfare teams dismantled Zenari communications, turning their own encrypted channels against them. Hackers disabled targeting systems, rendering their automated defenses useless. The Zenari, relying on superior coordination, found themselves fighting blind. But the true horror came when humanity abandoned restraint. Zenari biology was robust, resistant to most known pathogens. But humans had spent centuries mastering biological warfare. Within weeks, labs developed engineered viruses designed to spread through Zenari ranks, silent, undetectable, and lethal. Entire battalions fell without a single shot fired. Psychological warfare followed. Captured Zenari soldiers were not executed. They were returned, but not as they were before. They carried stories of human brutality, of soldiers who laughed in the face of death, of civilians who turned their own corpses into weapons. The Zenari hierarchy, so used to order and control, began to fracture. And then came the final shift. Humanity stopped fighting defensively. The first counteroffensive was codenamed Operation Retribution. A captured Zenari transport, loaded with human special forces, infiltrated an enemy command ship. Within hours, the vessel was seized, its crew slaughtered. That ship became the spearhead of Earth's first interstellar assault. Zenari-controlled outposts, once considered untouchable, were wiped out in coordinated strikes. Human forces, now wielding a hybrid of Earth and Zenari technology, moved with terrifying efficiency. The war had changed. The Zenari were no longer the hunters. They were the hunted. The Zenari warlords convened in desperation. What had begun as a routine extermination had become a war of attrition, one they were no longer certain they could win. Humanity had transformed from an insignificant species to a force that defied all conventional logic. Every setback, every loss, only made them stronger. It was no longer just resistance. It was vengeance. Entire Zenari fleets were vanishing without explanation. Supply lines were disrupted by human strike teams operating deep behind enemy lines. Formerly secure planets burned as Earth's forces, once confined to their homeworld, expanded outward like an infection. The war, once confined to a single system, was now reaching the heart of the Dominion. The Zenari could not comprehend it. No species had ever done this. No primitive world had ever survived, let alone pushed back. Their analysts tried to rationalize it. Technological theft, guerrilla warfare, sheer recklessness. But none of those explanations accounted for the terrifying reality. Humanity was relentless. The war had been costly for both sides, but humans had never fought for survival alone. They fought for retribution. For every city reduced to ash, they returned the devastation tenfold. For every atrocity committed against them, they answered with unflinching brutality. The Zenari, masters of fear, now knew terror themselves. Defections began. Some Zenari commanders, unwilling to face the wrath of human retaliation, abandoned their posts, surrendering their fleets in exchange for mercy. Others chose to flee, seeking refuge in the darkest corners of the galaxy, knowing they would never be safe. But for the ruling warlords, there was no escape. Humanity did not negotiate. They did not offer peace. The Zenari had come to Earth as conquerors. They would leave as nothing but a warning. The final blow came not from a grand battle, but from a message, a single transmission broadcast across every known Zenari channel. It was not a declaration of victory. It was a statement of fact. This war is over. You are over. Zanari-controlled worlds, abandoned by their leaders, fell one by one. The once mighty Dominion fractured, its remnants hunted down by the very species they had dismissed as primitive. And when the last Zanari warlord fell, humanity did not celebrate. There was no triumph, no grand parade. There was only a quiet, unshakable certainty. They had been seen as insignificant, as weak, as prey. Never again